Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. A couple of weeks ago, Sean and Britta released a new booktube tag using the letters that make up the word VLOGMAS to suggest their prompts. I've been fairly slow in my response, which often seems to be the case, but here it is. The first prompt is V is for Voyage, a book that involves travel. Since this prompt does not ask us to list a favorite book about a voyage, I'm going to talk for a moment about a book I struggle with, but which has been important to me in a couple of strange ways, which I'll talk about later. That book is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, a novella about a voyage by British ivory traders up Africa's Congo River at the end of the 19th century. On one hand, the book is a searing indictment of the violence, the horror of colonialism. At the same time, though, Conrad writes about the people of Africa in not only stereotypical ways, but in ways that sometimes seem dehumanizing. Nigerian author Chinua Achebe condemns the book as racist. As he says, it's offensive and deplorable. And of course, he's right. But still, the utter condemnation of imperialism and the colonialist project is intense and powerful. Conrad rejects the idea that Europeans were somehow more civilized than the rest of the world. There's several interesting books which have commented on the complexity. I'm eager to read Maya Jasanoff's The Dawn Watch, Joseph Conrad in a Global World, a newish book which combines biography, literary criticism, and history to explore the development of international capitalism. The second prompt is L is for LGBTQ+. Recommend a favorite book or author. One of my very favorite lesbian writers is Audre Lorde. She was a phenomenal poet, and I love her nonfiction prose even more. Zami, A New Spelling of My Name, is a deeply moving memoir of her childhood and growing up, and it's a book that talks openly about her experiences of discrimination based on gender and sexuality, on race, and on disability. At heart, the book is about love, her love for various women in her life, friends and lovers, and also her mother. Sister Outsider is a collection of Lorde's major essays and speeches, articulating her feminist, womanist thinking, really charting out one of the first visions of what we might now call intersectionality, how true feminism must address not only gender and sexuality, but racial and ethnic identities, class hierarchy and privilege, disability and illness, age, etc. As she recognized, all forms of oppression are interrelated. One of my favorite works by Audre Lorde is her Cancer Journals, a series of excerpts from her own diaries as she went from diagnosis through treatment for breast cancer. Her book meant a lot to me even before my own diagnosis, and her decision to forego reconstruction after mastectomy and her choice not to wear breast prosthesis absolutely shaped the decision I've made myself. Although this book is about her personal experience of illness, it's also about her politics. This book and all of Lorde's work is deeply moving, deeply compassionate, and hopeful. If you haven't read her work before, I strongly recommend you start right away, probably with her memoir Zami. I'm looking forward to reading more of the biography Warrior Poet by Alexis DeVoe, a book which I poked around in quite a bit, but not yet read systematically. O is for Oldie But Goldie, a book you read a long time ago that holds a special place in your heart. One of the first books I ever really fell in love with was Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. I'm planning a couple of posts about it later in the week and month, so I won't go into it here, but I know this is an oldie but goldie for many of you. G is for Gift. Share some anecdotes about good and bad experiences with books as gifts given or received. I'll mention two, both good. One was when I was a little girl. My parents had acquired a box set of Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I grew up in a small town with no bookstore. In an era pre-internet, I had never seen a box set before. All I knew is that the large wrapped box in the corner, a box I knew was my present, was terribly heavy. My father put it out a couple of weeks early, and when I begged and begged him to tell me what it was, he finally relented and told me it was a bricklaying set. I was disappointed for days until I finally got to open it and found not bricks, but words and stories in that box. My second wonderful gift was a present for my 40th birthday. My husband David tracked down a copy of one of Alice Starmore's incredible knitting pattern books. At the time, both Aran Knitting and Fair Isle Knitting were out of print, a decision made by the author, and in great demand. I had loved her work for a very long time and was ecstatic to own my own copy. Starmore's books are now back in print and even updated to allow a larger range of sizes, but I'll always love my beautiful original edition. M is for mass market paperback. Do you like them? Why or why not? I'm not a huge fan of mass market paperbacks, at least not now with my old lady eyes. I prefer larger margins, larger print, whiter paper, etc. I tend to write in my books too, and I love having a little extra room. But I've read and loved many mass market paperbacks. I'll show you a couple. First, my edition of The Great Gatsby from when I was 13 years old or so, well loved over the years by both me and my son. He laughed gently at my early teen girl handwriting, and I'm pleased to say that his analysis was a bit more nuanced than my reading was back then. The other mass markets that play a big role in our family life belong to my son. When he was in 8th grade, he won a sonnet competition held by the Folger Shakespeare Library. The award? A complete set of mass market Folger editions of the plays. They are beautifully edited, with nice commentary, a really wonderful set to have. My son lined them all up on the top shelf of one of his bookcases. Every time we saw a professionally staged version of a particular play, he would push the corresponding book back an inch or so. By the time he left for college, only one book was still sticking out, Henry VI, Part 3, and he got to push that book in over fall break his freshman year. We officially became Shakespeare completist, at least as viewers. He's now keeping a list of all the Shakespeare performances with which he's been involved in some way, although he's not yet started using these books as a way to keep track. A is for All in the Family. Whether you come from a family of readers or you do not, tell us about it. Yes, I am lucky enough to come from a family of readers. In fact, I'm not sure my parents would have fallen in love with each other if it were not for books. Both were studying in a city a few hours away from their hometown, and a mutual friend offered to drive both of them home for Thanksgiving. My mother, who was quite literally a beauty queen back then, spent the car ride reading a book required for one of her English classes, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, at least if I'm remembering the story correctly. My father fell in love with her on that drive, not because of her beauty, but because she was underlining color symbolism and interesting ideas in her book, A Match Made in Heaven. When I was young, my mother's literature lined the upper shelves of my bookcases. When I was bored, I would climb up and pick out whatever sounded interesting. That subtle form of encouragement to read definitely shaped not only what I read as a young person, but how I eventually parented as well. Who was it on BookTube who talked about how important it is to consider one's bookshelves before raising children? I'm afraid I don't remember, but my parents definitely succeeded on that front. My father was one of the most widely read people I've ever known. He read a tremendous amount of history and contributed some books of his own to that stream. When it came to fiction, he was especially fond of Southern writers, including William Faulkner and Eudora Welty, but also more contemporary writers. He loved the poetry of Natasha Trethewey, for example, and eventually they became friends. She even wrote an essay for a book put together in his honor. Near the end of my father's life, he exchanged some emails with my son about Shakespeare's play Two Gentlemen of Verona when my son was in the middle of playing the role of Proteus. I'm so glad that the two of them got some time to share their love of books and words. For the last prompt, S is for Santa, books on your Christmas wish list. I already own so many books I have not yet read that I actually don't have any books on my holiday wish list. My mother's already offered my family a warm, fleecy lap blanket to cuddle up under, one I'm sure we will use when we read. I gave my husband some new fireplace accoutrement to replace our ancient and broken tools, and we've already spent a few evenings reading together in front of the warm flames. I do have a bit of actual reading material on my wish list, I guess. I'd love a subscription to the print edition of the London Review of Books and or the New York Review of Books. Mostly, though, the bookish thing I really want is what I suspect many of you want most of all, more time to read. Thanks for joining me today. See you soon.